I love working with technology, and my background is in library and museum work, and I've moved into the e-research world, and I'd like to have that space filled with more library types too someday. And the work that I do is very much with the people who are doing the technical side of things, and I focus on the data. So the role I have of Information Services Co-ordinator is about the join between the people and the data, and trying to understand how we might get that data in and structure it, and how people might use it. And that's simplifying things, but some days it feels very much like that. But really, we want it to be a day like that for researchers, so that you can kind of glide down, carrying your coffee, and do the kind of thing that you do. But really, this is a massive mapping exercise, and I've only undertaken smaller mapping exercises, so this is a massive challenge for me. And I don't do it alone, thankfully. I work with Connell, and I also work with my colleague Anne Cregan, who is a semantic web expert. So I think we've got enough resource to actually keep us all motivated. Whoops. But those are, I guess, my broad level key responsibilities as the Information Services Coordinator. So I'm looking at the data architecture. I'm looking at what form the data is in its local data source. I'm looking at how it might come in, and I have that conversation with Connell and Anne. Anne does interoperability. And I'm wanting to make sure that whatever tools researchers are using now, or may want to use later on, can potentially work with what we do to this data to bring it together and make it meaningful and useful. So this morning, while we were having the talks, which were really interesting, I was tapping away at the Encyclopedia of Australian Science as one of those data sets that we're bringing in, because Connell has got it into a tool that we're using, and I'm going through it with a fine-tooth comb. So that familiarity with data is a process that I'm going through as the Information Services Coordinator, and I need to understand, if we're going to take data from these data sets, what we're going to take. So there's a curation process in there, and trying to understand what will happen when we translate it. And the meaning part of that is really critical. It is, I have to make sure that I understand what the people were doing when they created these data sets, were intending when they arranged their data in the way that they've arranged it. So I'm essentially reading data, and I'm trying to make sure that the reading that I have is checked by other people, so that when we actually transfer it into the lab to create what we call the HuNI aggregate, and to build the core ontology that that aggregate is structured with, that it's meaningful, that we're actually interpreting accurately, and we're not actually making assumptions about things. Or if we make assumptions, we actually perhaps will see them as a result of actually missing them, because it's not a perfect process. And I think Olwen's comment was a really apt one. This is not a perfect science. It's not necessarily something you can measure, but I think people understand when you get meanings wrong, and that's really important in this process. So that's one part of the equation, and then the other side of it is that I coordinate the expert data group, so that we all together actually get a shared understanding of what's happening. So those diagrams that Deb showed were a really important first step into what I refer to as RDF world, which I won't bother you with the definition of that, but as someone who's worked with traditional library schemas like MARC, we've all drilled library catalogues and used MARC. It's all right. I've also worked in the museum world and in the archival world, so different schemas. That's my lingua franca, if you like. RDF is a whole new lingua franca for me. So I have been going through this process of beginning to try and mind meld with people like Connell, who's very familiar with this stuff, and try to understand what that means when we turn data into something that we're familiar with dealing with, into a different kind of arrangement of data. So that sounds all terribly complex, but I think in the end it's actually quite simple. It is just about kind of breaking down the barriers of understanding what it is that we're doing. So that's what the expert data group is about, making sure that we all understand what on earth's going on. So there's a list of bullet points about the sort of general tasks associated with information services coordination. So I'm trying to help with that alignment and unionising process of the data, and I am making decisions about what goes into the aggregate and what doesn't, and that's based on ideas of what would be useful to a researcher. So we've been talking to researchers to find out what questions they've got, what's driving their research, and what is data that we leave behind in the local data sets, that if someone wanted to do some sort of forensic work, that they would really need to go back to the owners of those data sets. And what happens when you discover enriched data in the aggregate, how would you feed that back into your local data set? ideas about two different views on something, the idea of contentious assertions or conflicting assertions about something. I might call myself Ingrid Mason, but my mother might just refer to me as Ing. So we have to try and encode that, or enable that to be encoded, so people can actually agree and also disagree. A typical day would be me sitting in front of my computer, I guess, looking at the data that's been supplied, and Connell has loaded it up into this tool called Gadget, which is a fantastic name, and it's data structured in XML, and he's harvested that from our partners, and I start to look at it. I want to know what its name is in the schema, because that starts to tell me something about the data, and then I look at the value associated with that, and I examine those two things together, and then I look at the data around it, so I understand the context in which that data has been captured. I literally go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and that's a process that needs to be undertaken. But outside of that, I'm building I guess a workflow with Anne and Con. But what needs to happen when we actually add another data set to the aggregate? That it needs to be looked at, it needs to be examined, and we need to build a translation of that, which is, by the end of my day, if I get through that data set, I'll have identified what needs to go through into the aggregate. I will pass that on to Anne, and Anne will have a look at it. She looks at it with a view from what we might take from that schema, and actually how that informs the building of what we are referring to as the HuNI ontology. Most of the data in the humanities is an interesting mixture of what I call factual or characteristic data, like dates, and then what I guess I call narrative and interpretive material. And so we don't have, zeros and ones, and in the linked data session I'm going to go through this. But it is, in the sense, I see it as reading of texts, really, and it's like absorbing an encyclopedia, slowly bit by bit, to understand how they actually put that encyclopedia together. So it is a real ground-up process, and it's intense, it's fantastic. I'm not sure I'm going to get the chance to do it ever again. I hope so. But I'm also what they call a product owner, so I represent you, the researchers. Because we can't drag everybody into our project space, and we're a distributed team, we have to try and understand a little of what you do and how you do it, so we can represent your needs when we're working out how to design the workflow and how to design the interface. And we will have researchers testing with us, but I'm one of your stand-ins, if you like, so I can represent that view. What else have I got there? Yeah, workflow. Workflow is something that we need to understand a little bit more about, so that it's a smooth process, either from those who are passing in data or those who actually want to take it and do stuff with it. So I'm looking at it from what I refer to as an ingest point of view, what comes in, and also what you as researchers want to take out of it and what you want to do with it. So I go from that kind of, highly complex, and I try and get it down to something which I think is quite simple and understandable for those who've passed the data to us. We have a liaison process. Scott Yaden at the Australian Dictionary of Biography had a look at what I'd done when I'd gone through the data, and he gave us some feedback about some of the patterns we were seeing. And we're seeing patterns of, I guess, what I call notation variation. I put an Ingrid with a capital I, the person next to me puts it in without a capital. And if you have no control over vocabulary, then you get different words that might mean the same thing. So the conventions in the way that people put data into their databases becomes apparent. And also some of the things that you do to present it. We need to understand those too, so that when we process it, we might leave that stuff out. So that was a very useful exchange. It's an absolute imprint. The way that you structure data says an enormous amount about you, and the way that you, I guess, have been guided by conventions of scholarly work to capture data. So, progress to date. We're designing a process for this. So as we're doing it, we're also designing a process around how we might do this so we can get a bit quicker each time we go. So that's one of the things we're doing, and we're building translations, or what we call crosswalks. So Gavin referred to something called EAC CPF, so did Tim, I think. It's a schema to capture information about people and organisations that's used by the archival world. And all these 4 data sets that we've been working with, they've captured their data in different versions, if you might like, of this schema. So that can create some kind of friction, and when you're trying to bring them together, they don't actually perfectly align. So you're looking at ways to read it so that you can actually see that these two things actually mean the same thing when you lift it out. And liaison, because if we're going to do something with your stuff, you know, if it's your data and we're going to do stuff to it, then we need to make sure our partners understand what it is that we're going to do, or at least take that leap of faith with us if we don't know what we're going to do. So those are the links to some of the pictures. I'm now following this guy on Flickr, having got his bookmark, because his images speak to me as someone who's working with data every day.